The annual Garter Day ceremony at Windsor Castle was meant to be a display of royal tradition and unity, but instead it sparked a silent war. When Queen Camilla arrived in full regalia, Kate Middleton's family was mysteriously excluded from the guest list. Their seats of honor were quietly given to Camilla's relatives. Soon after, unfavorable stories began flooding the media, isolating Kate and stripping her of key appearances. Behind the scenes, Princess Anne watched in silence as Prince William began to question everything he thought he knew. And when Kate collapsed behind palace walls, those who once stayed quiet began to rise. Beneath the polished rituals and velvet robes, a brutal power struggle had begun. The Garter Day ceremony at Windsor Castle had always followed strict tradition. Seats were assigned with precision, every detail reviewed by royal staff weeks in advance. That's why what Kate Middleton saw left her cold. As she entered St. George's Chapel beside Prince William, her smile held, but her eyes scanned the front rows. Something was off. Her parents, Carol and Michael Middleton, were gone. She had personally confirmed their seats. They were supposed to be there. But instead, Queen Camilla's son sat front and center. His sister, Laura Lopes, was beside him. Other unfamiliar faces, Camilla's extended family, filled the row usually reserved for senior royals or direct relatives of those being honored. Kate's grip tightened slightly around her clutch. No explanation had been given, no prior warning. The Middletons had simply vanished from the guest list. William noticed the shift in her posture. "Are you all right?" he whispered under his breath. Kate didn't answer immediately. She simply nodded, keeping her composure, but her jaw clenched. "We'll talk later," she murmured. Inside the chapel, the ceremony continued. Choirs, titles, traditions. On the surface, everything was as it should be. But Kate sat frozen. The exclusion wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, and she didn't need to guess who was behind it. Camilla sat ahead, calm and perfectly composed. This was no oversight. It was a message. After the ceremony, the royal family gathered briefly for formal photos and private conversation. Kate moved with quiet precision, her expression calm, every movement composed. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. But behind her serene presence, frustration simmered. She hadn't yet spoken to her parents. Their phones had gone unanswered all morning. No message, no explanation, no apology from the palace. William stood beside her, scanning the room. He hadn't missed what had happened. While Kate kept her emotions sealed, he recognized the look in her eyes. Not sadness, humiliation. The Garter Day event was more than tradition. It was visibility, legitimacy. For Camilla to replace Kate's family with her own wasn't just protocol breaking. It was public displacement, on purpose. William leaned in. "We'll get answers," he said quietly. But Kate barely nodded. Later, as they walked through one of Windsor's private corridors, she finally spoke. "My parents have never asked for anything," she said, her voice low, "and they were treated like they didn't exist." William stopped. This wasn't a scheduling error. This was orchestrated. Kate met his eyes. "Camilla doesn't want me visible. She wants her family seen, at any cost." William's jaw tensed. The pieces were forming. Camilla had been consolidating influence for months, but this was the first time it directly humiliated Kate in front of the entire establishment. A quiet royal aide approached with an envelope. Kate's itinerary for upcoming summer appearances. She opened it. 2 of her scheduled charity events had been reassigned. No explanation. Her stomach sank. First her family erased, now her duties. Slowly and without confrontation, she was being pushed to the side. As they returned to Kensington Palace that evening, Kate sat in silence in the car. The trees outside blurred past the window, but her mind was fixed. She knew how to handle public pressure. She had survived tabloids, scrutiny, even comparisons to Diana. But this felt different. This was coming from inside the family, from someone wearing a crown. And Camilla was doing it all without ever raising her voice. Princess Anne hadn't missed a thing. At the Garter Day ceremony, she arrived early and observed in silence. Her way. While others posed for cameras and exchanged greetings, Anne stood near the back, hands clasped in front of her, her eyes sharp beneath the brim of her understated hat. She noticed the seating arrangement the moment she entered. Camilla's children in the front row, the Middletons absent, and the tension in Kate's expression, no matter how carefully masked. Anne knew royal tradition well because she had upheld it for decades without fuss or fame. She didn't need to ask questions. She simply took note. In private, Anne said little about these things, but her silence wasn't indifference. It was calculation. Later that afternoon, over tea with a long-serving royal aide at Clarence's house, Anne spoke quietly. "Middletons weren't there," she said. The aide nodded. "Camilla's office sent revised placements, said it was last minute." Anne gave a soft exhale. Last minute doesn't happen here. She already suspected what was unfolding. Camilla had slowly been introducing her family into ceremonial spaces, one event at a time. Appearances, invitations, photo ops. Now this, and every move had gone unchallenged. Anne wasn't fond of palace drama, but she had her limits. The monarchy, to her, wasn't about charm or PR. It was about order, lineage, duty, and the moment someone used access to manipulate legacy, Anne paid attention. Back at her desk that evening, she made a few handwritten notes in her private journal. Small things, names, shifts, mentions, a pattern forming. She didn't confront anyone, not yet. That wasn't her way, but she was watching. And if Camilla thought she could rewrite protocol without consequence, she'd soon learn Anne wasn't just the Princess Royal in title. She was the monarchy's memory, and she never forgot. Just days after Garter Day, the tone in the media shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't blatant, but it was unmistakable. A headline in one Sunday tabloid read, "Princess Catherine missing in action? Royal absence raises eyebrows." Another from a morning paper more favorable to Queen Camilla speculated, "A changing royal landscape. Who's really stepping up?" Kate read both from her desk at Kensington Palace. She didn't speak, but William, standing beside her, picked up the same tension Princess Anne had already noticed. These weren't random headlines. They were calculated. Camilla had spent years repairing her public image, transforming from the once scorned figure into a queen accepted by most. But behind that transformation was a carefully built network of loyal press contacts. Editors, columnists, freelancers who knew where to direct attention and when. Now they were quietly turning their pens toward Kate. No direct attacks, nothing loud enough to provoke backlash, just enough to plant a seed. Where was Catherine during the Garter luncheon? Why were her parents absent from such an important royal moment? Had she begun scaling back from royal duties? In truth, Kate had been sidelined. 2 of her appearances were canceled without her consent. Others were postponed. The public didn't know that. Instead, a narrative was forming, one that portrayed her as fragile, uncertain, or worse, retreating from her role. And it was working. William's aides had already fielded 3 calls from reporters that week, all asking variations of the same question. Is everything all right with the Princess of Wales? Inside the palace, Kate remained composed. But this wasn't like past tabloid flare-ups. This had the markings of an inside campaign. She'd been in the royal circle long enough to know how influence worked, and she could see who had their hand on the lever. Camilla wasn't confronting her directly. She didn't need to. By simply reassigning duties and letting the press speculate, she was doing something far more damaging, undermining Kate's image in real time. It wasn't the first time she'd been tested, but this time, it felt like there was no one stepping in to stop it. No one, except maybe Anne. While the press began reshaping the narrative, Queen Camilla stayed out of sight. She didn't issue statements or give interviews. She didn't need to. Her power wasn't in what she said, it was in what she moved quietly behind the scenes. At Buckingham Palace, her private office, separate from the king's, had grown steadily in influence since the coronation. She had surrounded herself with a tight circle of trusted advisors, some with backgrounds in media strategy, others in court protocol. Each played a role. It was Camilla who suggested that Garter Day seating be revised for flexibility. It was her office that confirmed the guest list to the press. And it was her longtime media liaison who gave background quotes to journalists describing the monarchy's evolving representation. Everything appeared procedural, but the timing was deliberate. Royal watchers noticed a pattern. Camilla's family had begun to appear more frequently at official events. Her son, Tom Parker Bowles, once only spotted at family functions, now appeared beside ambassadors and dignitaries. Her grandchildren were mentioned in briefings about upcoming holiday appearances, positions traditionally reserved for Windsor heirs. Behind closed doors, Camilla never raised her voice. She didn't issue demands. Instead, she made quiet suggestions to the right people. She asked the right questions at the right time, always with a smile. To the public, she remained warm and gracious. In photos, she leaned into Charles with soft eyes, the image of a supportive queen consort. But to those inside the palace, the shift was undeniable. Kate noticed it most of all. Appearances she'd led for years, early childhood initiatives, mental health forums, were suddenly under review or transferred to others. Meetings were quietly canceled. Invitations she once received now went to other senior royals, Camilla's allies. It wasn't sabotage in the traditional sense. There were no confrontations, no insults, but the result was the same. Kate was being pulled from view, and Camilla, she was filling that space with her own people. It was a long game, and Camilla was playing it well. Kensington Palace was quiet, too quiet. Kate sat alone in her private sitting room, a cooling cup of tea untouched beside her. The fireplace flickered, but its warmth didn't reach her. On the table lay her marked-up calendar, once filled with engagements, now full of cancellations and blank spaces. It had been weeks since Garter Day, and though no one said it outright, the message was clear. She was being edged out. At first, she thought it might be temporary, routine reshuffling. But then came the pattern. A charity gala she'd attended annually was suddenly handed to another royal. A meeting with educators she had personally requested was postponed indefinitely. Speeches she had prepared were now being given by others. Her name was vanishing, quietly, one event at a time. Even inside the palace, she felt the shift. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Staff who once greeted her with warmth now seemed guarded. The usual schedule updates she received in advance arrived later, sometimes not at all. And William, though supportive, was caught in meetings, briefings, diplomatic calls. He tried to comfort her, but there was little he could do without triggering more tension from within the family. Camilla's growing influence had put even him in a bind. Kate hadn't seen the Queen in days, not since that moment at Garter Day when their eyes met and Camilla smiled. That smile had stayed with her. She tried to focus on what she could control: time with her children, personal notes to her charities, quiet moments with William. But even in those moments, the weight pressed down. She felt like a guest in her own life. One evening, she reached out to her mother by phone. Carol's voice was soft, kind, but tired. "We're fine, darling," she said. "But they didn't even tell us why. We just weren't allowed through the gates." Kate swallowed hard. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Carol paused. "It's not your fault, but it feels like someone wants us far away." Kate didn't respond. She couldn't. The lump in her throat was too strong. Outside, rain tapped against the palace windows. Inside, Kate sat in silence, isolated and aware that something deeper than protocol was unfolding, and it had her directly in its path. Princess Anne had never been one for drama. She didn't deal in rumors or palace gossip, but she knew the feel of shifting ground when she stood on it. And what was happening to Kate wasn't just a series of missteps, it was a pattern. And Anne didn't like patterns that threatened the monarchy. At Clarence's house, her office was simple: brass lamp, leather chair, well-worn desk. No fuss. But her filing cabinet held records, emails, internal reports, and recently, whispers. A longtime aide had flagged something unusual. Several of Kate's scheduled engagements had been redirected without any clear protocol. The paperwork didn't pass through the normal chain. It came directly from another branch of the palace, Camilla's. Anne didn't jump to conclusions. She read, she listened, she observed. Then she picked up the phone. "Robert," she said, speaking to a retired royal scheduler who had worked under her mother, Queen Elizabeth. "Do you recall if royal family seating ever excluded parents of a future queen?" He was quiet for a moment. "No, ma'am, not once. The Middletons should have been front and center. That wasn't an error. That was a choice." Anne didn't respond right away, but she circled 2 words on a memo on her desk: last-minute revision. She began to compile documents, nothing explosive, just enough to trace the changes, who approved them, and when. She requested internal emails quietly and asked her aides to monitor palace media contacts. Then she did what very few royals ever dared. She scheduled a private meeting with the king. Charles agreed. Anne arrived precisely on time. No entourage, no theater. Just her small leather notebook and that expression she wore when she meant business. She sat across from her brother and didn't waste time. "I believe Camilla's office is reworking engagements to sideline Catherine," she said plainly, "and I believe the press is being guided to reshape public opinion." Charles blinked but said nothing. Anne continued, "You may not want to see it, I understand that, but I will not stand by while this family structure is compromised for personal agendas." Charles sighed. "Camilla isn't doing this to harm anyone." "No," Anne said. "She's doing it to help her own, and those things are not the same." She didn't threaten. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Anne had drawn her line, and for the first time, Charles realized someone inside the walls was no longer willing to stay silent. William had remained quiet for as long as he could. He wasn't one to make emotional decisions. Years of royal training had taught him restraint. He had watched his parents' chaos play out in headlines. He had vowed to be different. But watching Kate fade from view, deliberately, strategically, was testing every ounce of that control. Her smile at public events remained flawless, but he saw what others didn't. The weight behind her eyes, the long pauses before answering simple questions, the way she stared out the window, lost in thought, as if trying to hold herself together piece by piece. And then came the incident that changed everything. It was a routine dinner at Kensington Palace, a quiet evening with a few extended family members and senior staff. Camilla's son, Tom, had been invited. William hadn't objected. At the time, it seemed harmless. But halfway through the evening, as conversation turned to public image and royal roles, Tom made a remark. "I suppose not everyone's built for the pressure of monarchy," he said with a half laugh, eyes flicking toward Kate. "Some crumble under the crown faster than others." The room fell still. Kate didn't respond. She lowered her eyes. Her hand tightened around her wine glass. William's entire body went cold. He stared at Tom, who looked back with that same smug indifference he'd always carried. No apology, no retraction, just silence. Camilla, seated nearby, didn't flinch. Charles was speaking to someone else, oblivious. William didn't say anything at the table. Not yet. But when the evening ended and he and Kate returned to their private quarters, he closed the door behind them and said quietly but firmly, "That's it." Kate looked at him, startled. "William, number this ends now." He grabbed his phone, called his private secretary. "Clear my schedule tomorrow morning. I'm meeting with my father, alone." For William, confrontation wasn't natural, but protecting Kate, that was instinct. He had been patient. He had given Camilla the benefit of the doubt, but this was no longer a matter of misunderstandings or office politics. His wife had been insulted, his family sidelined, and now his silence had become complicity. William wasn't just the heir to the throne. He was a husband, and he had just been pushed too far. It happened quietly. There were no flashing lights, no dramatic public scene, just a private dinner, a few family members, and a long day behind her. Kate had arrived that evening dressed with the same poise she always carried. Her navy dress was tailored perfectly, her makeup subtle, her smile present. But behind her polished exterior, something was unraveling. She hadn't slept the night before. The pressure had reached a slow, grinding peak. The headlines, the disappearances from events, the growing whispers that she was unwell, unfit, too delicate for her role. And now Tom Parker Bowles's words echoed in her mind, words meant to sting, to break her silence. As she sat at the end of the table, the conversation carried on without her. Charles spoke about an upcoming garden reception. Camilla, sipping wine, nodded with calm detachment. William, beside her, was still seething, but restrained, for now. Kate quietly excused herself. "Just a moment," she murmured, standing. She walked toward the hallway, but something shifted. The chandelier above her blurred. Her hands trembled. The room tilted. She reached for the wall, but her legs gave out. The thud was soft, but sharp enough to silence the table. William was on his feet in seconds. "Kate!" He rushed to her side, crouching, lifting her gently. Her face was pale, her eyes closed. Her breathing was shallow but steady. A staff member called for the physician. Within minutes, a royal doctor was at her side, checking vitals, asking quiet questions. William held her hand the entire time, jaw clenched, heart racing. "She's dehydrated," the physician said. "Exhausted, likely stress-induced. She needs complete rest." Kate stirred slightly, her eyes opening just enough to see William. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He shook his head. "Number, you have nothing to be sorry for." Later, as she lay resting, William sat by her bedside, unable to look away. This wasn't just stress. This was accumulation. Silent blows one after another, until her body gave in where her spirit had held strong for too long. He looked down at her, then out the window, where London's lights shimmered in the dark. He'd already called his father to request a private audience, but now it wasn't a request anymore. It was a demand. The study at Clarence House was dimly lit when William arrived. Charles was already seated behind his desk, his glasses resting low on his nose, a teacup untouched beside a stack of papers. The fire crackled faintly, casting shadows along the antique bookshelves. He looked up as his son entered, tired, older than the last time they'd spoken alone. "William," he said quietly, "I heard about Catherine. Is she all right?" William stood tall, hands behind his back. His tone was even but laced with cold purpose. "She collapsed, Father. From stress, from exhaustion, from being pushed." Charles exhaled slowly, adjusting his glasses. "Yes, I heard. I'm deeply sorry. She's under a lot." "No," William cut in. "She's not just under pressure. She's being targeted, undermined, and we both know where it's coming from." Charles froze. He looked down at his desk. Camilla wouldn't intentionally hurt her. "She excluded her family from Garter Day," William said, voice rising just slightly. "She's feeding the press subtle attacks. Not strong enough, fragile under pressure. Catherine has been erased from engagements she led for years, and now her son made a cruel comment at our dinner table, in front of her." William stepped forward, voice firm. "I didn't come here for a discussion. I came to tell you this stops, or we walk away." Charles stared at his son. "You mean step back?" he asked. "I mean entirely," William said. "Kate, the children, me. If Camilla continues to influence scheduling, media, and roles within this institution, we will not participate." The fire snapped behind them. For a long moment, neither moved. Charles looked older than he had in years. His hands trembled slightly on the armrest. This was the weight he feared most, the impossible choice between the woman he loved and the son who embodied the monarchy's future. "You know what she's done," William said softer now. "You just don't want to see it, but if you keep choosing silence, you're choosing sides." Charles stood slowly. "She stood by me when no one else did," he whispered. "And Kate has stood by this institution with nothing but grace," William replied. "So who's protecting her?" The king turned away, walking to the window. London's lights flickered in the distance, indifferent to the storm brewing within the palace walls. For the first time, Charles said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. The knock on Charles's study door came at precisely 6 p.m. Princess Anne entered without ceremony. No assistant, no folder of aids. Just her, a slim leather binder in hand, and that look she reserved for moments that mattered. Charles, still standing near the window, turned slowly. He looked worn, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. "Anne," he greeted, "I know why you're here." "I'm not here to persuade you," she replied, setting the binder on his desk. "I'm here to show you what you've refused to see." Charles moved toward the desk, staring at the binder. His fingers hovered above it before finally flipping it open. Inside were carefully ordered pages, emails, internal memos, press briefings, all discreetly sourced. Anne explained, her tone steady, almost clinical. Page 1. An email from your media secretary. Camilla requested changes to press guidance the week after Garter Day. The goal? Position her family as core monarchy supporters. Kate was not to be mentioned. Charles didn't speak. Page 3. Guest list edits. Handwritten annotations. Camilla's. Verified by your private staff. She replaced Kate's parents with her cousins, without discussion. She let that sink in before continuing. Page 6. A memo from the Lord Chamberlain's office. Freddie, her grandson, was submitted as a candidate for honorary roles at state events. Not just Christmas, Charles. Multiple events. She's building something. Charles rubbed his forehead, the lines on his face deepening. Anne didn't let up. You've always believed Camilla was simply trying to belong. I did too. But this isn't integration. This is realignment. She's redrawing the lines of power, with her family at the center. Charles sighed. Maybe she just wanted recognition for them. After all these years. This isn't about recognition, Anne interrupted gently but firmly. It's about succession, about legacy. She's maneuvering to ensure her lineage isn't just respected, but remembered. Charles sat down heavily in his chair. Anne softened slightly. William gave you an ultimatum. I won't. But I will say this. Catherine is this family's future. The public trusts her. And if we let Camilla turn her into a footnote, we risk losing more than goodwill. We lose the soul of the crown. Charles stared at the binder again. The evidence was undeniable. Not a smear campaign, not rumor, a pattern. He closed the folder slowly, and in that moment, something shifted. Not in his heart, still tethered to a woman he loved, but in his judgment. Anne had done what no one else could. She didn't plead, she proved, and now Charles could no longer pretend not to know. Camilla sat alone in her private drawing room at Buckingham Palace. The winter light filtered dimly through the tall windows, falling across half-read newspapers and a silent phone. The buzz that once surrounded her, staffers, reporters, daily briefings, had vanished. Her calendar lay blank on the desk beside her. For days, her presence had been reduced to an internal footnote. A reception she once hosted was quietly handed to Catherine. A state banquet where her name was listed beside Charles's, revised to include only the King and the Prince and Princess of Wales. No one said it outright, but the message couldn't be clearer. The crown may be ceremonial, but the influence was real, and hers had quietly slipped away. She tried to reach Charles again. He answered briefly, said he was resting, that things were moving fast, that he'd speak properly soon. But Camilla knew. He had chosen survival, of the monarchy, of his legacy, of his son's future. And to do that, he had to let her go, not in love, but in power. Across the palace, Princess Anne stood at the center of a quietly restored court. Events ran on time. Schedules were balanced. The old guard, the kind who remembered Queen Elizabeth II's sense of duty, returned to prominence. And at Kensington Palace, Kate Middleton stood before a crowd of schoolchildren, dressed in pale blue, smiling, confident, calm. She looked thinner, more reserved, but she stood. The rumors that had dogged her were now gone. The headlines shifted from weakened to resilient. The public, knowingly or not, had made their choice. It wasn't Camilla's smile they trusted. It was Kate's silence, her strength, her refusal to play dirty in a war she never started. Back at Clarence's house, Charles spent more time alone. Aides came and went quietly. He attended functions only when needed, citing fatigue. But more than physical tiredness, it was the weight of everything he had let happen. He still loved Camilla, but the monarchy demanded clarity and continuity. That future now rested on William and Catherine's shoulders. And though neither said it aloud, they knew something had changed. The palace had shifted, not with headlines or scandal, but with absence. In the end, Camilla's undoing came not through rebellion or public disgrace. It came through stillness, through locked doors, through canceled appearances and eyes that no longer turned toward her. She remained queen consort. But in all the ways that mattered, her reign had already ended. And the monarchy, scarred but intact, endured.